Just off of Dempster, behind the Prairie View Center, past tennis courts and a couple baseball diamonds, you'll come across a small fenced-off plot of land, and there's an observation deck there. If you want, you can stand on its sturdy platform and look for a while at this little patch of land behind its chain-link fence. What you might not realize at first, as you're standing there, is that what you're looking at is an ancient artifact, as precious and rare as anything you'd find in a museum. Because you see, what you're looking at is the remnant, a small refuge, of the kind of prairie that used to cover roughly 2/3 of the state of Illinois. A little over an acre in size, this land is the Morton Grove Prairie Nature Preserve, a small reminder of the lavish biodiversity Illinois once supported, an ancient ecosystem that's all but disappeared because of demands from agriculture and urban expansion. In fact, less than 1% of the original landscape, what some preservationists call the natural or heritage landscape, still exist here in Illinois. And what you discover is that behind every prairie, the few that still exist, there's a story. One that begins, in our case at least, a little over 200 years ago. In his book, A Natural History of the Chicago Region, historian Joel Robertson writes, "At the end of the 18th century, Illinois was a natural wilderness, with original forest, myriad types of prairies, functional wetlands, and pristine lands and streams. In fact, diaries and letters from early travelers through the region are full of descriptions of the vast expanses of prairie they saw, often with grasses growing and blooming over 10 feet tall in the lushness of summer, prairies as far as their eyes could see. It was easy for a horse and its rider to be swallowed up in these prairies, and just as easy for the horse and its rider to get lost in them. But it was this sea of prairie, as beautiful as it was, that eventually succumbed to the thousands of people, many of them immigrants from Europe, who came to make their home and livelihood here. Between 1830 and 1840, for example, northeastern Illinois underwent a population boom, with more than 300,000 people coming to settle here. And as they came, the prairies began to vanish. Homes were built, fields were plowed, roads were built, and railways were laid down, and invasive, non-native species began to overwhelm an ancient ecosystem that found itself suddenly being run out of town. And so it went. The next 120 years or so saw most of the original Illinois landscape converted to agriculture and urban areas. It wasn't until the early 1960s, largely due to the efforts of one man, George B. Fell, that legislation was passed to help establish a system of nature preserves in Illinois. Slowly but surely, over 40,000 acres of preserves are now set aside for the public to explore, learn from, and enjoy. Which brings us back to our prairie here in Morton Grove. Back in the early 1970s, not long after the Park District had acquired the land, residents John and Mary Helen Slater were informed by its previous owners that the property contained a patch of prairie that hadn't been plowed or grazed on for over 60 years.
The first knowledge of it was about 74. By pure luck, it came to the attention of my wife, and her foresight and vision was such that she thought we ought to investigate this piece of land and find out what was on it, because she thought there was many things unusual on it, and see if it was worth preserving.
Recognizing that this may indeed be a rare patch of heritage landscape, the Slaters, with the help of experts, began a preservation campaign that culminated in the then governor of Illinois, James Thompson, dedicating the prairie as an Illinois nature preserve in 1979. The Morton Grove Prairie is a remnant of what is known as a mesic and wet mesic tallgrass prairie. It's what covered so much of this region just a few hundred years ago. It's here that you'll find American goldfinch, monarch butterflies, big green darner dragonflies, Indian grass, compass plant, steel goldenrod, 13-line squirrel, Carolina rose, shooting star, wild strawberry, blue-eyed grass, eastern meadowlark, porcupine grass, rattlesnake master, marsh blazing star, big blue stem, sawtooth sunflower, and well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's hard to believe that such a small patch of prairie can support such a stunning amount of biodiversity, but it needs help. Dedicated stewards of this prairie carefully tend and manage it. Invasive non-native species like buckthorn and garlic mustard can choke out and destroy native species. One of the ways to manage this land involves the careful use of prescribed fires. Prairies, you see, are fire-dependent communities. Without fire, tallgrass prairies like Morton groves are invaded and overrun by these invasive non-native species.
Now we're going to be burning, and fire is very important because the native plants all evolve with fire, and they're stimulated by fire, and the fire knocks down the brush and the invasive plants, which are not adapted to fire.
As the Chicago Wilderness's Atlas of Diversity so nicely puts it, millions of years of evolution in the presence of fires have made the tallgrass prairie dependent on periodic fire for its survival. Evolved over time, many native prairie plants have roots that can actually reach far beneath the soil and easily survive fires. I was lucky enough to stop by in late April and witness the Morton Grove prairie undergo one of its yearly controlled burns. A month after the burn, I returned to the field to see what was coming up. Already, things are going green.